Hello, my name is Peter Dorrington, and I'm going to be the host for this section where we'll be discussing how Welsh Water made their transformation to the cloud. Joining me today are Kit Wilson, the Director of Operational Services at Welsh Water, Chris Woodward, who's the Chief Executive Officer at Anana, who were acquired by Savio last year and are now part of the Savio Group, and Brendan Dykes, who's the Senior Director of Product Marketing at Genesis. So Kit, coming to you first, what was the situation like at Welsh Water?
So prior to the transformation, Peter, we had a large customer service operation, large contact center, and it was all office-based. We had an on-prem solution, which meant that we didn't have the level of resilience that we needed. So we couldn't, as an example, work from home for our customer service teams. Our only kind of disaster recovery or business continuity solutions involved going to other sites should we have an issue at one site, which meant that, funny old thing, if there were a large scale event that were to happen that meant we couldn't access our offices, we were quite vulnerable in that respect. We also didn't have a huge amount of flexibility over our solution, so we didn't have the ability to make quite responsive, reactive changes to our solution, responding to our customers' needs. Again, thinking forward to what then happened, the ability to just adjust the customer experience based on ever-changing, fast-moving events, as we've all been through over the last couple of years, isn't something that we had prior to this transformation. So that was one of the key drivers for us in terms of why we wanted to make the move to the cloud. And as we'll go on to talk about a little later on, the outcomes have been really positive for us in that respect.
Great. So thanks very much, Kit. So if I understand it, then your compelling need actually started prior to the pandemic, that you'd already recognized that there was a need to make a shift. Let me come to Chris. So Chris, you worked very closely with Welsh Water on this. What did it look like from your perspective?
Well, it's interesting because when we first started talking to Welsh Water, it was obviously many months prior to that. And initially, we were engaged to build an on-premise solution. And gradually, through the process of talking to them and understanding the needs, we collectively decided that a cloud would be the route to go. And it's funny because I can remember in the workshops, one of the things that kept coming up was the guys at Welsh Water were worried about something else happening, like the beast from the east, which had obviously been quite disruptive the year before. So it was very topical, but we did not realize throughout the process that it would become that urgent at the time. And so, running up to March last year, we created a cloud, and we built the solution for Welsh Water, and hoping that actually planning on having, I would say, an extended period of gradual rollout. But obviously that didn't happen. It all went with a bang in the last minute.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And there's a couple of points there I think I would just like to focus on for a moment. So I think that if we were honest, many organizations, when they were looking at their disaster recovery plans, were anticipating that they could either fail over to another site quite easily, or that they would have capacity elsewhere that they could bring in. And I think a lot of organizations were assuming that they would be able to take a rather leisurely stroll through the transition. And I think many people, I would say, anticipate that they expect there's some risk if you move swiftly. But as you pointed out, March last year, things changed, and changed dramatically, and changed for everyone. And that is obviously going to impact the way that you roll out and make the transition. So Kit, let me come back to you then. So bearing in mind that where you were, you wanted to look at a different solution. You had no capacity for doing home working, and your disaster recovery plan, pretty much like everybody else's, was assuming fail over to another site. And then all this happens. How did the transition go for you? And were there any surprises?
So it was a very full-on and intense period. We, as Chris alluded to, we'd been planning, prior to the pandemic, a smooth transition in March of 2019, and 2020. Make sure I got my years right there. And we'd been working up to that date prior to the pandemic. Everything had been going well, usual project stresses, but nothing out of the ordinary. And then the pandemic happened, and the criticality of this project delivery became even more visible to the whole organization. We had over 500 different users from different teams right across the business who were going to be transitioned. And the plan had been that we would move our core contact center first and then roll out gradually to other areas. So if you think of areas that are really critical to the business, we've got people who are on the IT help desk, people that are in our we have a smart hub here where we deal with all of our responsive alarms, so an absolutely critical part of the business. And the plan was to roll that out gradually after the initial go live, test, learn, all of the usual practice that you would expect. The week before the country was fully locked down, we brought forward the cutover. We cut over on the Saturday. So Chris and myself and a number of the project team were in the office completing that cutover. And then on the Monday, we went live with all of the contact centers in one go, the first day that they'd used the system in anger. And that night then was when the Prime Minister made the announcement that essentially we shouldn't be utilising offices for work in the main. So the next day, we then essentially transitioned the whole operation to working from home. And bear in mind, all of those users had only used the system in anger live for one day, and those that weren't in obviously wouldn't have used it, and then immediately, and we tested on day one on that Monday home working, so we were confident it would work, but not under this much stress in terms of the amount of people on the system, and also really testing people's broadband capability for it's really high drain on people's broadband use, obviously with voice calls. So that was a huge transformation for us in that period. We, over 3 days, managed to roll out all of our contact centers to working from home successfully. Even that included transitioning people who didn't have laptops that they couldn't take home. We effectively worked with our IT colleagues to transition their desktops into effectively working as a laptop, so they could then take it home, so they had a device to take home. And that all happened during that first week. So by the Friday, we were back at the point where we had full numbers in all our contact centers operating for all our customer service operations, providing the service that we would normally expect at a time that was absolutely critical for our customers. Obviously, people are really worried about what this pandemic would mean for them, for their water bills, for their water supply, etc. So really intense week, went remarkably smoothly, and not because we didn't have faith in the technology, but because of the amount of change we had to enact within a couple of days' time. And it's been that way ever since. So we have people coming into the office periodically, but in the main, the operation operates in that way that Chris, I, and the team set up on that. Started to roll out on that Tuesday, following the go live on the Monday and the Prime Minister's announcement that night.
Well, thank you very much, Kit. That sounds like an incredible story. And I think that for me, the surprise was just how quickly and smoothly that went. As you say, you had a plan A. And if you're an agile organization, of course, what you can do is if you come across an obstacle, you just go around it, get back onto plan A. But it sounds like you had to adapt and go from plan A to plan B very quickly, which was, well, plan A isn't going to be an option for the foreseeable future. We need another way to it, and how successfully that worked. And I just want to alight on one point that you mentioned, of course, the pandemic by its definition affected everybody. So this wasn't just affecting you, it was affecting everybody you deal with. And as you said, you've got customers who are concerned about their circumstances and, continuity of water supply and provision, and perhaps they didn't have access to the kinds of ways they normally would interact with you. So much greater reliance on the contact center to deliver that exceptional customer experience I know that Welsh Water is renowned for. Anyway, thanks very much for that. I'm just going to bring in Brendan now, because Brendan, that sounds like some kind of record. Is Kit's experience typical or atypical? What other experiences have you had of rapid transitions to the cloud? And could you just take a few minutes and talk us through what some of those examples might look like?
Sure. Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Kit, because I think you illustrated very nicely how the moves to the cloud can be smooth, can be carried out in a rapid way if the need or the desire is there, and they are good reasons to take time on deployment, but we have had examples where it's been extremely rapid. I know of a UK utility broker who tried to do a stage cutover. They had their on-premise solution, diverting calls to their cloud, to Genesis Cloud. And unfortunately, their session border controller broke, and they realized that to be able to continue to work, that they had to make that cutover. And so they did the whole migration in 12 hours. So it's the business deployment of it was very, very rapid and very straightforward in that particular case. And that not only enabled them to be ready for when the pandemic came, fortunately, but it also enabled them once their staff were beginning to work at home, it changed their mindset about the way that they employed staff. It allowed them the flexibility to have staff working in different places, to employ staff in different parts of the country, and a different demographic of staff who were able to support their business at times when their general staffing had always been difficult to fulfill. And I know of another example, a European telco, again on Genesis Cloud, who, when the pandemic came, were considering furloughing their 250 retail store staff because all their branches had to close. But instead, they converted those stores into mini call centers because they had the flexibility to be able to change their system so rapidly and redeploy those staff in ways to support their call center. Because, as you said earlier on, call demands grew rapidly because of people's concerns about bills or concerns about their service availability. And so they were given a week to be able to deploy this. And in fact, they turned it around in a day and a half. So again, the ability to be flexible and be able to deploy rapidly in an emergency situation is important. But I've got a third example of an insurer, an Irish insurer, again, who were on Genesis Cloud, were migrating to Genesis Cloud from a premise solution, and they were struggling to get the business case through for the project. Eventually, he did that, and the deployment was very smooth and a normal deployment, very smoothly rolled out. But now that has enabled them to become much more agile to changes in the business. And in this case, the move towards new channels and new departments. So yet again, the ability to rapidly change the organization to reflect their changing business needs has been made available by this move to the cloud.
Thank you very much, Brendan. Three great examples there. So maybe it's not so atypical as I thought. Certainly my experience was these things always seem to be on a 3-month roadmap, and we've got lots of milestones and interim steps. I'm going to come back to that in a moment, because I think that you introduced some really interesting points there. I'd like to talk in a minute about the people, process, technology interface, if you like, that holy triangle that we always talk about. But Brendan, sticking with you for a moment, those three cases you gave, and obviously Kit as well, fantastic journeys, very quickly completed with really good results for a transition to the cloud. But is there a recipe for success here? So, and if so, what is it? So what would you recommend Brendan, in terms of the things to think about to maximize your opportunity to get a successful transformation?
Sure, and I think those cases illustrated some of the underlying principles that were needed to be in place for them to be successful. And I think organizations like Welsh Water showed in their process. And one of those is around shared goals, getting the organization aligned across the teams, right the way from the top, in the importance of moving their contact center operations to the cloud. And not just the contact center, but the digital side as well, because customers aren't in a silo. They use whichever channel they want to use. So getting alignment across the organization that moving to the cloud will unlock potential. It's a way of moving the business forward so that it becomes much more agile and much more able to consume and leverage innovation. To move from that idea that that it used to be with technology is, when am I going to have this? When's the next release? When's the next capability available? To the continual deployment of innovation and that idea of, when can I consume? When can I take this? When I have, it's no longer a technology change, it's a business and processes change. So I think getting the business realigned to rethink how the cloud is changing their world is the first part. But of course, to get to innovation, you need to be on the right platform. You need to get there, and we very much take this walk, run, fly approach. We think about what flying will be like. We think about the future and how we can get there, but we have to get there by one step at a time. And that first step, of course, is moving what you have from the premise environment into the cloud. First step, and then the gentle roll up of new ideas and new capabilities to move the organization to a running organization where it is much more agile, and finally to flying with all the new technologies like artificial intelligence, digital channels, workforce engagement and planning and management. It's not a destination, it's a series of journeys towards the real benefits that cloud can unlock. And finally, as well as getting the organization aligned, getting the planning right, is about having the right partners, the partners who will bring the project to life. Now, we've got great partners for Genesis like Anana and Sabio, who will work with our customers to form this important triangle of supplier, partner, and customer, who can work together to change the way that organizations behave and the way that organizations interact with the technology that unlocks this potential for the future and really sort of evolves the organization from this technology constrained almost organization to this released organization, which is able to be agile and move much faster as their business demands dictate.
Great, thank you very much, Brendan. Yeah, you've raised again some more interesting points there. I think alignment is critical, and not just alignment within the client or alignment within the technology provider, but alignment of all three parties, including the importance of engaging with a great partner. So speaking of great partners, Chris, I'm going to come to you now. You and Adana and Sabia have been partners with Genesis for some time, but I'd like to know, is there anything you would add to that recipe of success? And what does it look like for you when you're at the coalface actually delivering this transition?
So my top tip, if you want to accelerate change and innovation, is have a pandemic. but you know, I mean, it was quite an amazing time. We made the decision literally on a week before we went, you know, before that Monday, that we needed to go live. The guys at Welsh Water, you know, were planning, were keeping an eye on the situation and knew that this was going to happen. So, you know, it really focused the mind. I mean, sometimes with IT projects of any type, people can get bogged down focusing on edge cases and things like that, which when you've got through it all, don't really matter. So it was very much, let's do this, let's make it happen. And you know, we work very closely with the IT department and with the business at Welsh Water as well. They were preparing all the laptops and the PCs to be able to take home. We were focusing on all the important things that we needed to get the migration. Everybody was in one place. It was great. I just kind of remember being in on the Monday of go live and kind of walking around, and it was just a great buzz. Fantastic experience working together in that situation. I think we all got a buzz from it. And what was amazing as well was seeing all these agents going live, using the system to take a few calls, then literally picking up their PCs, putting them in the cars and going home with them. Then there was the challenge of supporting them at home, which everybody rose to, and we worked together with the Welsh Water IT department, to make that happen. But what it also did, we initially had a plan to roll out over a few weeks, a few months, and then a plan to innovate. That got brought in. So, things like knowledge integration, digital channels, AI, all those things. We could start those projects a lot sooner. So the knock-on effect wasn't just, allowing the business to continue to serve the customers in a crisis, but it was also, let's accelerate all the innovation that we plan to do in the cloud anyway. And we have been able to do that. So it's great example of everybody working together, I would say.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, I do like that point about one of the greatest stimulus is to have a pandemic. Let's be brutally honest, nothing good about the pandemic, but it did act as a catalyst for change and to accelerate programs that were already in place or foster a desire to go down that route. I'm going to come to you again, Kit, in a moment, but before I do that, I just want to touch on a couple of those points that we've already talked about in that recipe. So the first thing I think was, well, let's go to Chris, your point first. You really do need a compelling reason to change, and that people acknowledge that there is a good reason to change, because then you can use that to engage and excite everybody that's going to be part of that change. In the case of the pandemic, it was we had no choice. So necessity became the mother of invention. We had to do it because there wasn't any other plan that we could adopt. That didn't mean, though, that you abandoned all the things that you were interested in or that you were looking to deliver. And if I go back to Brendan's point about alignment and shared goals, when you're flexible, that means you don't just throw your vision out of the window and run around just trying to achieve whatever you can achieve. You do keep that there, but you give yourself the ability to either work your way around an obstacle or find a way where we say, well, we adjust our course. In this case, we change over from operating model A to operating model B, so on-prem to working at home. And the other one, of course, is to give yourself the resilience to deal with the bumps along the way, in that we even now are still looking at a long period, I think, of uncertainty and volatility. We know there's going to be more changes going along. But when you're all aligned to a common goal, when people are shared in that vision and are excited about it, you can make the change. And then Brendan's other point was, the walk, run, fly approach is important as well. Don't try and do it all on day one, but you can certainly accelerate some of the benefits that you were hoping to achieve because now you have the platform to do it. So Chris, your point was you could introduce some of these technologies that you were thinking about or capabilities that you thought, well, we'll get to those a bit further downstream. They actually became available earlier on. And I do quite like the way you were talking about people coming in, they were working on their workstations, they could pack them up and take them home. Now, I know that that's easier to say than do in some circumstances, but it sounds like you did it. So great recipe there, alignment, taking a phased approach, working with the right partners, having that compelling reason to change and engaging and inciting people in that process. So Kit, you and Welsh Water went through all of that. What I'd like to do now is ask you, looking back, how would you describe the results? What does it look like now in retrospect?
Overwhelmingly positive, I think. None of us would wish to have, been through what we did in terms of the pandemic. But I would definitely agree with Chris's point earlier. From a transformational perspective, the pandemic has been great for us in terms of really driving us to deliver change at a far greater pace and take more appropriate risk with our change. So I think that's one positive we can take out of obviously something that is quite a big negative. In terms of the results, I touched on it earlier. The big element is resilience. So we have a far more resilient customer operation now. It's also far more responsive. So if I give you an example, we obviously our customer demand is heavily driven by what is happening with our water network. So if there are any incidents with our water network, that can lead to spikes in contact. Historically, we've always had people available on standby. So if we need to call in additional call handling resources, we can do that in order to deal with the additional contact that we may get from any particular incident. Now, so historically, that would have resulted in physically calling people to come into the office to take calls from wherever they lived. Now that is as simple as contacting those people on standby and getting them to log in on their, at home. So that is a small thing, but that immediate response, being able to increase your contact handling capability and size at that, rapid time frame of 5 minutes versus the half an hour to an hour that it would take someone to pick up their stuff and travel into the office is really important for us and allows us to provide a much better service. I also talked earlier about how our on-prem solution didn't allow us to make sort of real-time, quick, responsive adjustments to the customer experience. That's been great in terms of the result of being able to, tailor the customer journey based on what's happening. So if, as an example, we're seeing a certain trend based on the impacts of COVID, we can very quickly tailor the journey a customer goes on, very quickly, publicize a new digital service that we've launched, whatever that thing may be. So, customer behavior, all our behaviors have changed. That means we're going to have to react differently. And I don't think that's going to stop until we're necessarily out of the back of this period of time. And having a customer service solution that allows us to adapt very quickly to that has been great. And in terms of high level results, we've managed to deliver really strong SLAs to our customers. In terms of speed of answer for our telephone, which is a basic thing that we measure, but we wouldn't have been able to do it if we didn't have people that could take telephone calls at home. It's that simple.
Great, thank you very much, Kit. And I do like the point you've picked up in terms of the way that this has provided you with a platform for actually making additional changes. So well, in summary then, let's just take a couple of those points very briefly before we close. So thanks, Kit, for talking about the situation at Welsh Water. You clearly had a compelling reason to make the transition, and then you had an even more compelling reason to make it quickly. So that was the first point. We found ourselves there with the need. Then the actual transition itself came down to just a few days, not weeks or months, which is what many of us would have expected a transition like this to take. And as we heard from Brendan, that's not necessarily unusual. I think that I don't want to underestimate the heroic efforts that I'm sure people put in everywhere as we were dealing with some of the aspects of things like the pandemic. Nonetheless, it sounds to me like this is something that is relatively straightforward and can be done at pace. But of course, you don't have to achieve everything at once. And Chris, we heard some interesting things from you about, the way that you had to get everybody involved and the way it excited people, the way the staff could see that this was going to enable them to work in a different way, possibly even work in a different location, which is what they were thinking about. But it does take all of the parties to work in alignment. So everybody has to be focused on the vision and what we're doing and why we're doing it in order to drive lasting change. So it's one thing to flip people over from operating model A to operating model B, but also it gives us an opportunity to make change. And we should take advantage of the new capabilities. As Chris said, it introduces the opportunity to do different things, new things. And why not do that? If you have the capability, then certainly plan in how do we go through from what was a transition to start to think about a transformation. And as Brendan said, the best way to do that is a walk, run, fly approach. Have your eye on the prize at the end, but have a phased approach which allows you to continue to build on what you learn. Anyway, I think that the results that Kit and Welsh Water have achieved speak for themselves. And on that note, I think it's a great point for me to say thank you, firstly to Kit. Thank you, Kit, for sharing, and to Chris and to Brendan for bringing their insight into this as well. And finally, I'd like to thank you for your attention. And with that, thank you and goodbye.